First of all, thank you for coming on, Harrison. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. It's good to reconnect. I haven't seen you in a minute.
I know it's been a while, and our story started in high school with Richard Blue.
Yeah, shout out Richard Blue. That's everyone's guy. What were you? 2 years younger than me?
2 years younger than you, 3 years younger than you rather. And our stories connected for 1 year. You went off to college, and then what happened in college? You just got into the music business. Like, it was crazy following you.
You're undermining our story in
I'm undermining.
We used to kick it, you know?
Yeah.
I remember a lot of off periods and good times, and sort of you were the young gun, you know?
Yeah. Well, I always looked up to you.
Well, I appreciate that, man. Now there's tons of people looking up to you. So I think that it's cool that we reconnected. And I think it's very interesting, the concept of like picking shit up. No matter, you don't have to constantly stay in touch to pick it up, you know? I think a lot of people think that like you constantly have to be FaceTiming once a quarter or, you know, calling once a week, but like a friend is a friend, right? And I think there's very different levels of it. You know, we've been friends since the day we met. We're still friends. Yeah. We haven't seen each other in a long time, but we had those moments and we kept them going.
I think that's the thing about good people, right? You know a good person when you see it, and you find a connection with someone, and you realize like that person will be there for you no matter what, in any day, any time. And your past might not align in this moment, but they will in the next moment. So let's 100%. take us through what happened in college, because I was going through, you know, Facebook is how I was staying in touch with you back in then, probably 2014, 2013, around that time. And all of a sudden I'm like, what's going on with Harrison? He is just going crazy. Like, he's touring all over the place. Isn't he in college? What's going on? So take us through that story and those moments.
So I went to Vassar College, which is a small school in Poughkeepsie, New York. And I showed up as a freshman, and I realized if these seniors who have, you know, 3.95, 4.0, every accolade in the world can't get a job. This is fall of 2010. So if they can't get a job, how the hell am I going to get a job, right? The concept of like doing homework and showing up to the library was wild to me. You know, you sort of like get that being a high school senior, you think college is just a complete party and there's no commitment in the classroom. But when you go to I went to a very good, very competitive liberal arts school, and people took it seriously. I didn't get it in the beginning. I was playing college baseball, Division III, so that's not really saying much. But I looked at these kids and I was like, man, if they can't get jobs, I'm fucked. So I came home the summer of freshman year. My GPA was probably like a 2. I never told my parents my grades. I didn't even know how to register for classes. There was actually one semester my junior year where I forgot to register for classes. Then I registered for the same class twice. So the professor was like, Harrison, you took this class already. I was like, my bad. I guess I must really love urban politics and inequality. So I come home my summer. My dad's like, man, you got to grind on baseball. I'm like, Dad, I'm never going to really be any good. You know, I think I pitched like 3 innings. And I was with a buddy that we both know, Joe Duarte, and we were like, fuck it, man. Let's just throw a concert. I don't even know how it happened. We were in my backyard. We were like, we're just going to do it. And for me, I was like, this is my path to entrepreneurship, because I love music. The free music scene was happening. All these blogs, This Song Is Sick, Good Music All Day. They were putting out great music that, you know, it started with Chitty Bang, Mac Miller, Wiz Khalifa, right? And then it birthed your Logics, your Chance the Rappers. And now it's morphed into a whole different sphere. But we literally, in my backyard, we were like, fuck it, let's just throw a concert. So we threw a concert. We didn't even know how promoting works. We didn't understand that we could make money. We were just like, how many people do we know that are cool, could invite more people? This was when Facebook events were a big thing. And we were like, if we can get 60,000 people from a perception standpoint invited to this, everyone's going to show up. So we must have hit up like every popular person we knew. And we said, hey, can you invite your friends? So before you knew it, there were like 40,000 people invited to go to the show in the Canal Room, which isn't even really an active venue anymore. And it sold out. And I at that point I was addicted to it, and I wasn't addicted to, you know, the quote unquote lifestyle. I was just addicted to like the thrill of putting on a show, figuring it out. I like, ironically, one of the artist managers threatened to sue me because I didn't pay him correctly, but I didn't even know how to pay correctly. And then ironically, Logic was doing Jimmy Kimmel like 6 years later. And there's a scene where he's walking down the alleyway of Jimmy Kimmel, and the manager at the time pulled out of the parking lot, and he sort of fucked the shot up. And ironically, it was the same manager who tried to sue me in 2012. So I start throwing these shows at private prep schools, packing up on the weekends, every weekend. And I was fortunate enough to connect with Chris Rue, now my partner, founder of Visionary Music Group, Visionary Records, best friend, best man, and my recent wedding, COVID-free wedding, knock on wood. Still no cases from our 40-person wedding. And my whole thing was, how do I add value, right? So I would book these artists at these prep schools where I knew they had some extra money. And I would call up all these preparatory schools and I would say, how much do you have? They were like 4,000. I was like, great. 2,000 to Logic, 1,000 to the DJ that I know. And then, 500 for the hotels that we need to cover and 500 for miscellany. Sorry, somebody was calling. So I started throwing these shows. I must have thrown like 35, 40 shows. And I just started networking in the music business. And one day I was fortunate enough, he had Facebook messaged me saying, hey, I'm looking for an intern. Would you want to help? And in my mind, I was like, man, you and Logic, perfect storm. An artist who at the time and still, wanted to dominate the world and climb the mountain. And he did, selling out Madison Square Garden. Being a Long Island kid, that's the mountain to us, right? We've taken the Penn Station train, millions of times. And Chris was also a rare case in the sense that he wasn't just a best friend manager. He was, he was a true entrepreneur. So I was the first employee, I guess, I was the intern, day-to-day assistant. We literally worked out of the Port Washington Public Library because I don't even think I had access to a car in the beginning. And it just kept aligning right where Chris was getting overwhelmed. He needed a little help. Logic was touring in the summer. So I would go on the road and I was able to tour with him 2 times during the summer. Once during the spring, we went to Europe together. And then we started working with Jon Bellion, and it just was constant compounding. Logic was the underdog. We were the underdog. And I was just fortunate enough to be on this ride, and school was there, and it was more of just a constant rather than a challenge. It was like, okay, I got the shelter over my head. I can literally press click and release these Logic songs in the cafeteria, and nobody gave a fuck that I was doing it. Logic signed to Def Jam. I remember reading it on XXL, and like I was so excited. I high-fived this really sweet Asian girl, and she was an international student. She had no idea what was going on. You got to understand that all the odds were against me as a college student because they didn't have an entrepreneurship program, right? It was like 2 routes. It was like you were an econ major and you were going to go the, Bank of America, hedge fund, big dog route that a lot of parents, where we're from, where both of us come from middle-class families, but a lot of people from Port Washington are lucky enough to come from somewhere, a bit bigger. And that was the easy path, right? Your dad worked in finance, your mom knew somebody. And did you take Dr. Herring's business law?
I must have.
I failed it. I got kicked out of the class because I got a 64 on the first 2 tests. So we're hitting the road, right? Every summer for 2 summers in a row. I was in school, and I was sort of like I wasn't dropping out, but I was almost foregoing it. And it was either like the Professor A would love what I was doing and support it, or Professor B was like, my class is more important than gold. You're fucking your whole life up by chasing the stream. And I was fortunate enough to have like 3 or 4 really great professors who pushed me to keep getting after it. They didn't really understand it. And I actually booked Logic and Visionary's first client for a show at Vassar. I wasn't even there because I was throwing my own show for like a massive prep school in Connecticut called Avon Old Farms. It was like it was an all boys school. So I convinced them to bring the girls' school. So it was like a 6,000 person event. It was a catastrophe, but amazing at the same time. And that being said, I just trusted my gut, man. And I was like, the traditional route wasn't going anywhere, right? It's not going to run away from me, right? I was running away from it. So we I was fortunate enough, Chris let me intern while I was in school. I would practically just work a job while I was in school. He had the incredible foresight of figuring out that free music could translate into growing a dedicated fan base. And at the time, the music business was just recovering from the CD crisis. And people really didn't understand why we were giving away free music. But the fact of the matter is Logic sold, 100,000, I think it's 100,000 tickets before we ever put a song on iTunes, which is nuts. Which is wild. Yeah. Because we were doing this was the mixtape era, datpiff.com. They didn't think the numbers were real. And I was fortunate enough to be on the ride and just a fly on the wall. And I earned my stripes, man. I was literally intern Harry. You asked before, where does the name come from? I think it started there. They just called me intern Harry for like a year and a half. And then I remember I graduated from it.
So going back to in college, you're then dealing with, you're basically pursuing entrepreneurship, but at the same time, you're in college. What are the people around you saying? You're playing on this baseball team. You have professors who some supported, some didn't. But what do the people around you, are they thinking this person's crazy? Or are they thinking like, go Harrison? What's their mentality like?
I had a few. I didn't have many. I knew a lot of people in college, but I don't know if I had many friends because I wasn't there on the weekends that much. And the baseball team, it took a while to find my place. And a lot of the guys were really, guys, girls, everyone was really confused in the beginning. And Logic was almost paradoxing himself, biracial rapper, looks white, but he can really rap with the best of them from a technicality standpoint. But I just trusted the results, right? I couldn't lie when I would go on Instagram in the middle of class, in the middle of a sociology class, and he was getting 15% engagement. His tweets were trending. You couldn't ignore the facts, right? So it shifted towards the end. I think at the end, as he became more solidified, as he approached his debut album, and the proof was in the pudding. I was flying around the country, playing these shows, and then but it was like this wild dichotomy where like I went to Europe in the middle of the baseball season. We had just sold out a show in London, and then I literally flew back and went to like a weightlifting session for the baseball team where like I could barely lift, even with or without the music shit. I could barely lift any weights. So I decided to quit playing baseball, which I should have done a long time ago. But when you're chasing that dream, you also think that like it's the most important thing in the world, right? Like when you even going to college, it's like I think a lot of people get caught up in their classes and their grades, and they think it's literally the most important thing in the world. And for me, I was just like, the traditional route's not going to leave me. It'll be there in case this fails, but I'm just going to face entrepreneurship, head forward every day.
What compelled you to say that? What was there any influences early on that parents or people who you looked up to were like, okay, entrepreneurship is a way out? Or did you just get this idea in your own head?
I don't really understand like how to contextualize it or the way out, or, I just really was inspired by Chris and Logic and Jon Bellion, who was a young artist at the time. And I trusted in them, and I really trusted in Chris. And, the only thing I did really understand was I always want to be a part of something bigger than myself. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I wasn't reading like self-help books. I wasn't reading entrepreneurship. I wasn't consuming at the rate that I consume now. And what compelled me to do it? I don't really, I just blocked out the outside forces. I don't know. It was just very clear to me that I wasn't going to be able to make it in the traditional route. So I was like, I got to figure this shit out, survive in advance.
That makes sense. So, okay. So you get,
but at the same time, sorry, but at the same time, I am grateful for, I have a unique relationship with college, because if it wasn't for my college and the 4 years, for the shelter over my head, the professors that did push me, the friends that I did have, I wouldn't have been able to do what I do, right? I would have had to get a 9-to-5 job, and it would have taken away from literally being accessible all the time to help build this company. So I think it's an important time to find yourself those 4 years. Do I think that the college system is perfect? No. Do I think there's inequality and rooted in it? 100%. But I am grateful for, I am super grateful for the resources that were there.
I think what you just touched on is the reason why I started this podcast, which was to present nuance to something. Like if you read on Twitter, you see people say, don't go to college, or some people say, go to college. But the truth is that it's neither, right? It's like, it's totally dependent on your situation. College is neither good nor bad. It just is something. And there's a lot of nuance to discussion, and it's important to realize that. So take us through then. You're going to Logic and Chris are pulling you in, and you're basically the intern. What are some of the things you're doing?
Not basically the intern. I was, you know, what are the things I was doing? I mean,
Yeah.
if it was up to me, I would lick the floor where these guys walked, right? You know, it was surreal because I was a super fan.
Gotcha.
And I also admired Chris for his business acumen. So I really wanted to be like him. And what was I doing? I was literally doing everything, right? You know, like one of the first things I ever did, Logic and Chris, we roamed the city doing a photo shoot. I held the silver reflector, you know what I mean? And like, I took pride in it, right? You know, I held a sweatshirt. What did I do for Chris? I was the assistant. I was the intern. I was the, you know, the day-to-day. I was the mentee. What was I doing? Yeah, tour managing is really fun and cool on the outside, but the reality of it is you're cleaning the van that 7 guys live in at 3 a.m. and then eating at a Denny's, calling your friends from home saying, what the fuck am I doing with my life, right? Luckily, I love Denny's, so it was fine. But what was I doing? I was communicating on a really high level with people who were a lot older than me, maturing really quick. But then on the total flip side, just making the impossible happen, right? You know, when I say that is like, we're stuck at the border in Canada because we don't have the right paperwork. How are we going to get to the show in 5 hours?
Wow.
You know, where we fly to Europe for the first time. We go to King's Cross to take the train to Paris, and it's the biggest snowstorm in 10 years, and we can't get to Paris. We have no money, none of us, to make it to the next show. What do? I wait for 6 hours to get a refund to get enough money so we can make it to Amsterdam, right? So it was doing whatever had to be done. There wasn't like you wake up and like, here are your tasks today. It was like, whatever the fuck comes, you figure it out. And a lot of it in the beginning was minutia, or quote unquote minutia, but I still do a lot of the things I still dealt with. You know what I mean? I don't think you can be a good leader if you don't do the small things, because if you don't take the trash out, how can you expect your team to? Right.
That's really important. It's really interesting because when I was first going to Colgate in 2013, 2014, there was someone I became friends with who was in the music industry or music blog industry. And they knew who you were. And they were like, yeah, Harrison Remler, what'd he do? He just did everything that no one else wanted to do. And that's how he got to this point. And I thought that was really interesting. And I don't think I ever told you that. I don't think you know that, but it's really interesting that was a reputation of yours from 2013, 2014 of being willing to do anything and being willing to do what other people weren't. And it helps explain where you are today. So also what I want to know is, why were you so confident in Logic and so confident in Chris? You're basically giving them your lifeline and saying like, listen, like I'm putting my ship on yours. And if your ship doesn't succeed, like my ship won't either, but I'll do whatever it takes.
Yeah, I like how you use the ship analogy, because we used to talk about how like we had to eliminate all dead weight from the ship, right? It was just a 2-man show because you bring on a third team member, but if they can't hold their weight, you know, they're going to sink that ship. So what was it about them? I think that the results were there, you know, like every time I had tons of self-doubt and I had tons of confidence issues and I struggled with it a lot. And I think I shielded it really well, but the results were, when I would go to a show that either I was putting on or, you know, I would see Logic promote or we would put out a song, the numbers just kept getting bigger. Right. And you can't deny success when it's in front of your eyes. Right. It's when it's like literally tangible in front of you, when you like, even Jon Bellion, we had put out these pop mixtapes, which nobody had ever really done. And I remember we played at SOBs, which is a hip hop venue. We packed like 600 kids there. And like, you leave there, and I literally left there and took a train back to college and watched the movie Anna Karenina to try to pass this Russian final that I had to pass the next day. It was wild. But I watched it on the Metro-North. I preloaded it onto my DVD player at the time, which is a wild concept to think about. because I hadn't read the book, but I had to pass the class. I had to get a 66 because it was like a pass fail class. So the results were there, right? We would pack each show. Obviously there were mistakes that would come and go, and there were moments that I would miss, but to me, it was like, what made me trust them? The bigger question for me was like, these guys are letting me stay on the ship. How do I stay on it? Right.
Mm.
Like, how do I earn my stripes every day? How do I get better? How do I keep asking? How do I keep performing? How do I keep learning? And I think the biggest part of it is like, you talk about the reputation that I had, but we never tried to build reputations for ourselves. It was about the artist, right? I think if you, the concept of a personal brand is really interesting. It's changed a lot. I think there are advantages and disadvantages, but a lot in the beginning, my whole mantra was the artists are the reason. They're artists for a reason. If you're a manager and you want to shine, you should just start rapping. Anybody can get a microphone, especially today. So, that was something that humility was really important. It was like one of our pillars, like after, loyalty and work ethic and keeping things, we had a tight circle. There weren't a lot of people in the circle. So, loyalty, work ethic, and grit. And then, stay humble, because the mountain is high, and it gets higher and steeper as you get further up. And I think I'm barely at the base,
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the other argument. You're fortunate to be near the mountain,
Yeah. Well, the whole thing with this show is that you're climbing the mountain every single day, and you could choose not to look at it. You could choose to sit on the sidelines, but you go to sleep at night and you wake up and there's a new mountain staring at you. So if you just apply and think about that mindset every single day, it's easier to understand that life's going to be challenging. There's going to be things that you got to climb. So you mentioned just now loyalty, work ethic, and humility as the three pillars. Is that how you guys thought about it, as three pillars? Were there more?
I don't really think there were pillars per se. We never really would like write business plans or like this is our mission statement. Work ethic was definitely number one. We were relentless. We would work. I mean, we still do it. Like, 8, like we were literally working 16, 18-hour days. Like, we would go to LA and do 7 meetings in a day and try to do 8 the next day. We didn't take weekends. Anytime you had breathing that you weren't sleeping, you were working, right? Chris did a much better job of staying fit than I did, but work ethic was number one. Grit and perseverance was number 2, and looking fear in the face without talking about it. Right. We have this expression, like our 2 best employees are Kim and Bam. Right. So keep it moving and by any means. So like when some bad shit would happen, we'd always just say, Kim, keep it moving, because especially in the music management, that, crazy shit happens all the time. It's like constantly you're just an extinguisher trying to put out these wildfires. It feels like, especially when the world feels like it's not on your side, right? When you're, like I go back to, Logic's, he's a biracial rapper that nobody understands his story. He's from Maryland. How do they love him all over the world? It was very perplexing to a lot of people within the quote unquote industry. But to go back to the pillars, it was work ethic and loyalty and perseverance and looking fear in the eye, but not even saying like, hey, we're going to go through this. We just did it. A lot of stuff we just did, and we would look back, and if it didn't, and if it worked out great, and if there was a mess at the end of the 100-yard line, I would clean it up. Chris would tell me I clean it up, I would clean it up. But that's still the way we operate today. And still, it's better to just go through the experience rather than think about the problems that could happen via the experience. Then you get in your head, and it's like the positive, PMA, right? Positive mental attitude versus what you fear you attract, right? So if I would have said, if I would have thought in my dorm room prepping for that first tour with we had an RV tour bus. If I was like, how are we going to drive this thing? How are we going to carry the merch? It would have broke down every day. It ended up breaking down 5 times during the tour, and the merch literally snapped off. Everything happened that could have happened, but at the end of the day, you just do it,
So I think you're underselling you are driving the tour bus, or you're leading
I did. There's a lot of speculation about my driving abilities, a visionary. So I don't want to. I did drive a Nissan Altima across the country without any accidents and only 1 ticket, which is huge. Anybody who knows me now knows I suck at driving, but I hate driving. So and then we ended
that first tour you do with Logic. Talk about that and the moments and seeing everything from your perspective.
It was wild. It was like, I always say, like I had the best sideline view, right? Because I wasn't the number one and I wasn't the artist, but I was always had the access. And what was it like? It was nuts, right? We would wake up and we would do these 8-hour drives, and it was usually me, Logic, this kid Sladro, who was part of the crew, and then either Six, his producer, or Gravity, his videographer, in the Nissan. To be honest, Logic was working a lot of the time. He would rap over other people's beats. He would, he would play his new stuff and critique it. And I would just be in the driver's seat, taking it in and prepping for the show. So you used to have to advance the show. So you would call the venue and say, hey, we need X amount of parking spots. We need X amount of food. This is what we're bringing equipment wise. We would get to the venue at around like 3:30 or 4 the day of the show. The show would start at 8. Somehow it always worked out. Like, that's the crazy thing about touring. It's like, no matter what happens, the show still happens. Like, you could lose everything. We never missed a show. We never at all, unless it was, severe weather issues or anybody was sick, we never missed a show. So it was this wild thing where we were building community in real time, right? We would show up to Seattle for the first time. I remember the venue was the Crocodile, and Logic had met one of his biggest super fans there. His name is Henry. Shout out Henry if he ever listens. But it was like wild because these kids had this connection, and he would take the time. I would hold, the phone and do during the meet and greet and organize it. And he would take the time to, those 5 minutes created fandom for forever, which is wild, right? So it's like the concept of like, are you willing to give up 2 hours of your day to create long lasting, customers forever, right? It was nuts, man. But it was really, we didn't party, we didn't drink, Logic was very, very serious and strict. And we looked at it, every show as a new opportunity to gain audience, right? If we compounded, even if we did 81 tickets in, Scottsdale, Arizona, if we came back and did 200 the next time, great. So then 200 turns into 400. And then before you know it, you're opening for Kid Cudi at an arena. And then before you know it, you're co-headlining with, G-Eazy and Yo Gotti and YG at the amphitheater. And then before you know it, you're playing the arena yourself, right? That's a 7-year journey, but that's the journey and the route.
So when did you come in? At what part of the journey? Was it I came year in 3?
No, Chris had started the company. I came in, Young Sinatra 1 had just dropped. The first Logic mixtape, I think I started in May 2012. So Logic's first tour, maybe his second mixtape, actually thinking on it. Jon Bellion was just a recent signing. It wasn't really, he was just making music at the time. So I was really there in the inception, there's not many of us that are left, specifically in that Logic crew. People come and go, like we were talking about before we started recording, they're friends forever and friends for a moment or a moment in time, but that moment in time never disappears. That being said, I was there early, there was no Logic tour. I think there was one 4-show run without me, but really I was, day one. I like to consider day one.
Yeah, for sure. And then you see Jon Bellion's rise from the beginning. Now Jon Bellion is huge, right? It's million followers on all these platforms.
He's a beast, man. He's the coolest thing about Jon Bellion is he recently made it a mission to be one of the great, in my opinion, he succeeded his mission to be one of the most successful, one of the greatest songwriters in the music business. And he worked and did every session. And, back to when I was in college, I used to schedule these sessions with these writers. I didn't even know how, like a producer, writer, top line, I don't know. I would just text John, hey, show up here at this time. Sometimes he would sleep through it. I would reschedule it. I would step out of class to call them and apologize. And the cool thing about John was he's the first pop artist to ever take the hip hop model and to put out free music and to tour like a hip hop artist. At one point, he sold out 88 shows in a row.
Wow.
And he's a master of his craft. So we weren't going up there with, with respect to hip hop. We weren't doing just a DJ and a mic. He 6 band members since the first show he ever played. Majority of the band is still intact. So I have the utmost respect for him. And now he's on this complete songwriting tear, writing Justin Bieber's Holy, Anyone, Maroon 5 Memories, The Monster by Eminem. And to be a small part of it is wild. Yeah. I'm blessed to be a small part of it.
How has seeing that, the fact that you had some experience with seeing Logic's rise, did that help for Jon Bellion as well to understand how to navigate?
Yeah, because we knew if we saw X, Y, and Z that we could get, that meant that we were doing the right thing, right? So we were replicating a lot of the things we were doing with Logic, but putting a unique twist on it and elevating, right? So Jon was really well known for these behind the scenes making ofs of his songs. So he would recreate the songs in like 16 to 18-minute content, which at that time is, who would have thought that, content is king now, but like back then people were like, why are you creating all that? We were investing in shooting all these behind the scenes, and we were obsessed with when they came out. But we created a catalog of, if you find Jon Bellion today, if you find any of the artists I work with today, it's game over, because the content library they have on YouTube. I would love to find Logic today, because you're falling into 18 hours of interviews. You're falling into, 8 projects. You're falling into a New York Times bestselling book. It's wild.
What do you mean by that exactly? Like building the content library? So
in essence, the goal was always, when they had their big moment of a hit single, so Jon, All Time Low, which was a massive song at pop radio and massive at streaming, and then Logic, when he had his record 1-800, if you had just intercepted them at that moment and you went to search them on YouTube, our job was done, because there was so much content and compelling content that you were in the warp for good, right? You were in the algorithm before the algorithm, controlled you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's something that Gary Vaynerchuk talks about all the time. And it's something that any content creator can replicate, is like, you don't necessarily want to go viral until you have that back catalog. And that back catalog is what people will find if you have some viral moment a year from now, 5 years from now. But if you don't spend the time building it, like this interview right now is building that back catalog in a way, or maybe it'll be viral, who knows, right? But it's like,
if
that's
Gary
the thing.
Didn't go viral off your podcast, I'm not going viral. So sorry. But that's a really good point, right? And when you get, the bigger question is, when the moment comes to you, are you going to be ready as an individual before you even get to your brand or your YouTube page, right? Are you ready to seize that moment? When Logic had the moment at the VMAs, he had flown in from Toronto the day before, Chicago. We had to cut the tour early, but like, he could have performed with his eyes closed, right? Chris always says he had performed so many times. When you go 0 to 100 without putting in the work, I don't know if you're ready to seize that moment, right? So if you would have went viral after episode 1, I think it would have been a disaster for you, because you wouldn't have been ready, right? So, but when you get the opportunity to, chase curiosity with, whether it be, Guy Raz or Tim Ferriss, right? 2 of the best interviewers in my opinion in the world. Sure. You're going to be ready for it because you put in the work. So seizing the moment, but being ready for the moment. Yeah.
So how would you recommend, so like if you're looking at Jon Bellion and you're seeing him in the beginning, what are you telling him? Just build this catalog, put in the work, keep putting out music. What are you saying to him to prepare him for that moment?
I mean, let's look at songwriting, that aspect alone, right? Before he wrote The Monster, he had done, 200, 300 sessions, right? So he knew a session is a weird concept. It's really a blind date, right? You show up, one's a songwriter, one's a producer. Sometimes they're an artist. You don't know each other, and you're supposed to make a hit, you're supposed to make a smash record. And the probability of that is slim to nothing. One, you could make a smash hit. 2, does the world think it's a smash? 3, does the market let it be a smash, right? But Jon had, when he got the call to go to Stadium Red and record the original version of The Monster for Eminem, he had done 300 sessions. He had slept on the couch. You got to understand, these guys were, at one point Logic had a house in LA, and there were probably 4 bedrooms, 7 guys living there, and they were all cranking out music. Logic was making music. Like, he has a song called Nikki about, at the time, fighting an addiction to nicotine. And he went on almost like a recording bender, recording this for like 30 hours straight. And I remember I was driving to the airport successfully somehow. And I went to go out of the house. And he was like, I just finished the song. You want to hear it? Right. And, Bellion was the same way. He would just lock himself in. These guys didn't really they didn't party. They just worked and worked and worked. So they were ready for when the moment came. Right. So going back to the songwriting, it's not a surprise that, he's had so much success, because he's put in so much work. Yeah.
So someone like Logic or Jon Bellion comes to you and is like, hey, I want you to be the first person or one of the first people to see this new thing that I created. How do you not be a yes man? How do you give them your honest perspective? What do you say? How do you think about that aspect of what you do?
Yeah, to be totally transparent, and I think the reason why the partnership is so strong is I wasn't number one. Chris was never a yes man, and I also wasn't creative. Wasn't my strength, right? I loved, you would ask me, I loved every one of his songs, of both of them, right? And even our new artists now, I love all their songs, right? I'm the worst person to ask, so I wasn't, in full transparency, I wasn't giving criticism or critique or feedback. And it took me a while to realize why it was important to let Chris play that role, but that was his strong suit, right? But now when it comes to performing at the VMAs and getting 100 suicide survivors, authentic suicide survivors on that stage, and they say, Harry, get this done, they trust me because that's my job, right? So I think it's hard not to be a yes. It's very difficult to not be a yes man, but when you have a strong leader, like we have in Chris, to follow his conviction was a lot easier, right? So if he was going to, say, Harry, we're going to take a stand on this, we're fighting the label. We really need them to support this initiative. We're not going to yes them to death and vice versa. I just followed that conviction. So to be completely transparent, a lot of it I wasn't making the decisions. I was just helping execute them. But at the same point, I was able to challenge Chris internally. So I wasn't always a yes man, in my opinion. But it takes a very special person to challenge, top tier creatives, because it is easy to just be in the room and say, damn, that shit's incredible. Right. And I think, it takes a really special person. So I was lucky to at least be a fly on the wall to those conversations.
You mentioned that in a previous interview, I believe, that at first you wanted to be Chris and do exactly what Chris does. And then at some point you realize, like, I have my own strengths and I need to tackle it in my own way. So how did you get the self-awareness or come to the realization that you couldn't fulfill his role as CEO or whatever he was doing at the time?
To be completely honest, it was really difficult. It took a lot of mistakes to get there, right? So we would have rough patches in the beginning of our relationship, and Chris would sit me down, and after 3 or 4 of those, you realize what you're good at and what you're not, right? And double down on your strengths, and don't worry about your weaknesses, right? So I think obviously when you have only one mentor and it's a 2-person company, you obviously want to mirror that person and be what they can. But then when you realize that it's not just about being a company, isn't about one person, right? It's not about one artist, especially now. It's, you have a team, you got to play your role, because, at the end of the day, one LeBron can't beat 5 on the other team, right? When he goes, if it was just 1 versus 5, he would have lost to the Heat. But when he's got a squad, and, you just try to play your role. And if my job was just putting on tours or, executing on whatever these guys needed, then I tried to be great at that. But it was really difficult, because we would get into some tough times where, I would make a mistake or two and it would force us to have really tough conversations. But you got to be able to take criticism actively, right? I still take it. And I think that's because we push each other to be great.
Could you take us through one of those mistakes that you made where you had a tough conversation or someone had a tough conversation and it made a realization for you?
Sure. So, I'll think of a good one. I think that this is a good one. So Logic was playing Jimmy Kimmel on his first album, and we were on the call with a very well-known publicist at Def Jam at the time, and I pretty much almost asked him, like, have you ever done this before? And that's like saying, and that's like saying in the music business, and that's like saying in sports to LeBron, like, you should throw a chest pass a different way, right? It's like the way I contextualized it was really terribly, and I meant to say it a different way. And it actually, ironically, I was fighting for us to be on the outside stage of Jimmy Kimmel so we could show the world that we could sell it out, because the only bands that could quote unquote sell it out at speed were like 5 Seconds of Summer and these, I think One Direction or these massive pop acts. And I was like, trust me, Logic's going to sell this shit out. And he did sell it out on the first day. But the way I contextualized, the way I was conversating around it was incorrect. And that was a big moment where Chris was like, you have to learn how to contextualize things, right? Because your word is so important. That being said, you can mean to say something, but the way you contextualize it is it's equally as important, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Context is king. Context is king. So
Gotcha.
in essence, the mistake that I made was I wasn't very, I questioned somebody who was a quote unquote expert at this domain, and being a young kid, it came off the wrong way. It rubbed them the wrong way. That putting a poor reflection on Visionary, which at the end of the day was a poor reflection on Chris and Logic, which was my fault. And it forced us to have a really hard conversation about, you know, contextual, how to create context in conversation. Yeah. Whether
sense.
It's an email, whether it's a text message, whether it's a passing with a colleague, whether it's a really big conversation, right? So context is king, and something I'm still working on every day.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about your strengths. What are some of your strengths, you think?
Execution, right? So I'm best when the idea is formulated, I'm best when the idea is formulated, when the tour is planned, and when the marketing is in place, and when the idea for a life-changing moment for Logic at the VMAs is set in stone, and they pass me the ball and they say, get it done, right? So by any means necessary, right? That's what I do. So my strengths are pure operational and execution. And my biggest strength is work ethic. I'll outwork, you know, I wish I could do it in the gym, but I haven't figured out how to translate it there yet, but I'll outwork. I mean, in my opinion, I'll go eye to eye with anyone when it comes to the straight grind, right? So that's my biggest strength. Number 2 is execution, and number 3 is loyalty. And I think it's very hard to find extremely loyal people in this business, let alone all business. You know, like the music business has this weird reputation of like being shady, but every business has its issue. Every company has their big ego, small ego. You know, they're all the same. Business is business, right? And I think for me, I'm an execution. You know, I execute. Talk about context. I execute. It's better than saying it the other way.
Well, you know, it's crazy because I don't think there's anybody who responds to their email faster than you. You're crazy.
Yeah,
like
I'm an email rat, man. I don't know why. But it's also like, don't move too fast, right? I used to move too fast, and I still sometimes move too fast, and but it's important to move at speed, right? So moving at speed, but being precise at the same time, which is a very, very, very difficult skill, right? The same way at like, you look at the great artists that put out a lot of music. You look at Drake, he moves at speed, he puts out a lot of volume, but at the same time, he's so consistent, right? You know, it's rare that he's putting out a bad album, bad song. So, yeah, I love email. Sure. I like how it's organized. Text message is too much with the chats and the files I just like it all being there in front of me.
How do you balance that? Not going fast, but not going too fast. Like that seems like such a hard balance to strike. How have you thought about that?
Yeah, sure. I think that when it comes, like, if you boil it down on 2 parts, so one part on like email, right? A lot of email is very simple communication, right? It's, you know, cool, I'm going fast, but at the end of the day, I'm responding, you know, I just hit you before this. I was like, can I get 10 minutes? The Johnnies are up by 3. Like, you know, like that's not a wild, complex question, right? But it is really tough to move with precision when you've got a tour that's going out in 10 days and you have no lighting rig, you have no lighting setup, you have half your crew isn't filled yet. But you have to be patient because that vision comes from the artist, right? So if Jon doesn't know what he wants yet, and he hasn't decided if he's bringing, you know, if he wants to create, you know, his Pixar on stage, or he wants to create a different environment, I've got to just wait because you can't force the creative. So the balance is really tough. I'm still working on it. And I think one thing that's important to it is like, you realize that networking is about quality over quantity, right? You know, I think you can have 15 meetings to have 15 meetings, but if you have those 15 meetings and nothing comes out of it on the relationship level, what's the point? Yeah.
How do you go about thinking about people to network with? What do you think about when you're trying to reach out to someone? What's going through your head? Because you've networked with so many people, it seems like.
Sure. Yeah. And you know, recently I've networked via your podcast, right? You know, you put me in touch with some incredible people. And for me, I always, from the beginning, people thought I was crazy because I would go into these big agencies, William Morris, CA, and I would always introduce myself to every agent. every agent assistant. Sorry, the agents wouldn't talk to me because I was the intern. So they don't want to talk to you. So, and people would say, Harry, why do you care about the assistants? And I was like, because the assistants they're either going to go 3 routes. 1, they're going to become an agent. 2, they're going to fucking hate the agency and they're going to quit and leave this business. Or 3, they're going to become super, super valuable in a different part of this business, right? So the first festival Logic was ever a headliner on and being on the top line was actually booked by his first agent's assistant named Lucas Condor, who's an amazing, amazing dude. And he was probably my first friend in the music business, right? Because I would just, being a quote unquote little person, I guess, I never underestimated the little people, right? Like going back to Jimmy Kimmel, some of my best relationships are with the talent staff there, right? Not the talent booker, but like I would never underestimate, you have to understand when we did Jimmy Kimmel, Logic said he wanted a band, right? We had never performed with a band before. And
make it happen, Harrison.
Make it happen, Harry. And sometimes it's wild. They'll just say, John will do it a lot. He's like, Harry, just make it happen, man. He wanted like these varsity jackets in 4 days, said, Harry, make it happen. So he wanted a band. You have to rent the equipment. The term is called renting the backline. I didn't know how to rent backline. So I called the production manager who manages the stage. And I said, hey, Mac, his name is, can you teach me like what's backline? He was like, what do you mean? You don't know? I was like, dude, I'm 19. I don't know what the fuck backline is. He wants to play. Like, and it ended up, Mac is a good friend of mine. He actually just produced an incredible series on Netflix called Song Exploder, which is also a podcast. And, I know it's like 5 of like the 20 security guards at Kimmel. If I saw them on the street, they, what's up, Harry? Right. So like for me, it's just, who do I network with? I just try to network with everyone. But when it comes to reaching out, I try to find people that can teach me things that I don't know. Right. And I don't know. I barely know anything. Right. So I'll just interrogate people. Right. And it's being a sponge. And I just love to I'm chasing curiosity. That's like one of my main themes for 2021. And I think that's something that obviously this is what your show is, that you chase curiosity to lead to fruitful conversation. Right.
Absolutely. So
how do you create? Here's my chance. So how do you create? So you mentioned you didn't prep for this. So how do you create your questions and how do you chase? What inspires you to chase curiosity? Right. You're going on episode number what? I mean, you're in the hundreds, right? Yeah.
No, this is actually 65, 66.
Sorry. So you're approaching the triple digits, right? What inspires you to chase curiosity so consistently? You put out 3 a week. You put out a newsletter a week. You tweet constantly. So what inspires you to do what you do?
To have conversations like this where I get lost in the moment. I now learn so much about the music industry, never knew half of this stuff. And then I can potentially help someone else in a completely different situation who is just starting out. And I could say to them, oh, listen, like this is something that you should learn. So I think that the ability to help inspires my curiosity because I want to help others. I want others to be better. And if you learn more, if you're curious about how the world works, if you look at every person as a story that you can gain from, then you can help more people. So I think that's where the curiosity comes from.
And curiosity it's magic, man. It's wisdom, right? Conversation is wisdom. And there's, it's funny because it doesn't have to be at such a high volume. Sometimes some people speak less, but their words are so meaningful. Right. And I think that that's the complexity of conversations, right? You want to have these deep, thoughtful connections, but sometimes just being with somebody, I talk to my wife about it all the time. She's like a chatterbox with her. I'm like, I'm never going to be that chatterbox like your mom or your brother. Like, we're together. Like, when we're walking from Tribeca, from the office home, and it's 20 minutes. Like to me, the presence is the to Kanye, the presence is the present.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like overthinking it can be a problem. Like, oh, how am I going to say the perfect thing? Before I would be like in my head about it. Like, oh, how am I going to say the perfect thing? How am I going to make an impression on this person? Instead of saying, how can I be fully present in this moment? How can I give my all to this person in this moment, the best that I can? So I think that's a huge difference maker. You mentioned Twitter before, and I want to circle back to that. You've started to take Twitter seriously, and you've started to start tweeting No,
That's
it's
a
not
mistake.
about late
Yeah.
early. It's not late early. It's you're starting to take Twitter seriously. I'm starting to see you put out your story, and it fascinates me and it inspires me. So talk to me about why you decided to make that decision to be out there on
Sure.
Twitter.
I think Chris inspired a lot of it. He, the sort of people he was following and the quality of content they were putting out. And to be honest, I think I know I did. I false started a little bit because I started to I didn't realize that when somebody goes on a Twitter rant, right? Like a Twitter thread, you look Kevin Lee, somebody you connected me with, that's really thoughtful, right? My Twitter threads, early on, I was just tweeting them in my bed. I didn't realize that there was such complexity to creating a great Twitter thread, right? So I literally, right before this, at the halftime of the Johnny's game, I emailed Chris a thread on perseverance for his thoughts before I publish it, because I want to get better, right? I want it to be impactful. I want it to be important. Twitter's an incredible platform. It's a great networking platform. I appreciate anyone who responds to my cold DMs, and I'll respond to anyone back. I think that it's a great place for community, from communities of hip hop. You look at hip hop culture lives on Twitter. You look at the music business, lives on Twitter in its own sphere outside of hip hop. St. John's basketball, like I was saying before, I'm in a Twitter DM group of 9 guys. We're psychoanalyzing every play, right? So what's inspired me? I guess seeing really smart people tweet really smart shit. I got to step my game up. And the only way to do it is to try, right? You're out there putting out a ton of really poignant tweets, and I assume very similar. A lot of people you looked up to did the same, and you're trying to mirror it and make it your own.
Absolutely. And the thing is about tweeting, and like anything, is like you just got to do it, and you get better by doing it, and understand that it's not a game of getting it right the first time or the 100th time. It's just like, how can I put in the reps? How can I enjoy the process of writing these tweet threads? How can I enjoy the process of sharing my story? And then it becomes fun. You connect with people, people relate to it. So it's really cool to see you on there, and it's exciting for me.
Yeah, hopefully I can refine my writing, but I stand by my fight against standardized testing will never be deleted. Even though it might not be a perfect Twitter thread, I'm standing by that one. I think standardized testing is the worst thing ever. I think that it's rooted in inequality. I think that the fact that a test can determine your quote unquote future is pathetic. I think that your future should be determined by your willingness to make it what you want, and also your conversations, right? But also at the same point, some people may be able to conversate better in Twitter threads. Some people might be able to write better. Some people might, I was lucky enough where I could really conversate in person. I was always a personable person. So I would, for me, the fact that a test could potentially decide what happens to the rest of your future is ridiculous. We're fortunate enough to come from a really diverse town, but also, have supportive families that gave us, testing, what was it, like testing tutors or whatever. And, imagine growing up in the depths of an inner city where you can barely find, an open room to study, right? And you're going to really weigh those two against them. It's idiotic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the cost of it is ridiculous. Like, I feel bad it's a Sunday now, we're recording this. I used to go to Temple Judea near Holiday Farms near the Meadowbrook and do these standardized tests. The practice ones, dude, I would get the same fucking score every time. I would get a 17-20 every time. And the money that my parents, I feel I have a severe problem with it, and I hope it changes. But it's also the dichotomy of also appreciating college, right? So I'm still trying to find that happy in between. But I think that standardized testing is the most, talk about financial inequality and, overall enrooting inequality further. Yeah. I have a real big issue with it.
So interesting. It's like
second issue to Jewish sleepaway camp. It's my second biggest.
What's your issue with Jewish
I don't want
sleepaway
to go
camp?
on that thread.
Okay. Why don't you drop some wisdom? I like to ask guests who are leaving to drop some wisdom for people who are pursuing the highest version of themselves, whether that's mentally, physically, spiritually, in business, professionally, whatever it may be. What wisdom do you have for that person who is pursuing the highest version of themselves?
Just give them a minute of silence, man. That's wisdom. No, a lot of people ask me the same thing you asked in the beginning. How did you face the fear? If you think about facing the fear, then the fear already beat you, right? Just do it. Right. So I think the first thing I'll say is stop facing fear and just do it. If you think about facing the fear already won. The score is 1-0, fear 0 you. Always stay learning, always be learning, always question. And, even though once you ask questions, be a sponge, right? So if you ask a question and you get a great answer, how are you soaking that in and then regurgitating it to somebody else who needs help, or also regurgitating it back to, I was on a call earlier today and I was asking a ton of questions really because I wanted to figure out what does this person need that I can help them with. Now I can go back to my notes and then I can go back to my notes and bring them value. Right. And I guess the third thing I'll say is that it's just work, right? As crazy as, I don't live by that. Unfortunately, I got to work on that, but it's just work, man. Like I remember when I fucked up a brand deal for the first time with a big beverage company, and I came home, I was distraught, and I told my dad, and he's not in the music business at all. He was a chef for 18 years. He works in a big construction firm now. He said, Harry, you see these tall buildings? He was pointing to the city, right? It's like they lost $300 million today. Somebody in that building lost $20 million, right? And I'm fretting over a small commission. But at that point, when you live what you do, you think it's all you have, but it's not. And one thing that Chris has been saying to me, Chris has repeatedly said to me recently, show me your friends and I'll show you your future, right? So who you surround with, who you conversate with. Danny, if you merge all your guests, you're the next, RIP, but you might be the next Larry King. So show me your friends and I'll show you your future. And then fifth is take pride in what you love, right? I love to work and I love my wife and I love St. John's basketball, right? I fucking love that. Those are the three things. I love it, man. We were talking about eating healthy during the intermission. I love to eat, I should eat healthier. But take pride in what you love, right? No matter what it is, right? You might love the most minute thing of going for your morning walk for 5 minutes, or you might love the most, complex thing of, solving, wild quantitative problems, or solving the world issues, but take pride in what you love because nobody can define what you love or who you love but yourself.
I love it, man. That's great advice. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time. Where can people find you if they want more Harrison
On
Remler?
Twitter at Harry
Let's
Remler.
Go.
Instagram at Harry Remler. I got to make a LinkedIn. I'll make it Harrison Remler. You can find me on email, harrison.remler@teamvisionary.com. Hopefully you'll get a T-minus 12-second response. And if I can fix my A key on my keyboard's broken. Man, you can find me behind, hopefully you can find my artists that I work with and their work can speak for my team's work that's behind it. Right. I don't know, when you reached out to do this, I didn't think I was in the best position. It was in a weird time in my career where I didn't think I could really add a lot of value to this conversation. And now, when I reached back out to reconnect, finally I felt like I could add value to the conversation. So, hopefully you find the artists that I work with and you love their music and you think about the team behind it, because it's not a one man. It's not just Chris. It's not just Harry. There's tons of us and the artists are the ones who deserve all the credit and all the shine.
Well, thank you for taking the time. You've definitely provided a lot of value, my man. And hopefully we'll have to do this again sometime soon in person.
I would love to. I appreciate it, Danny. Thank you.